Welcome back. You're listening to the panel discussion, Emerging Cyber Threats in Government, sponsored by Booz Allen Hamilton on federalnewsradio.com at 1500 AM. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guests today are Donald Freeze, the Director of the National Cyber Investigative Joint Task Force at the FBI, John Felker, the Director of the Operations of the National Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Center at the Homeland Security Department, Jeff Massimilla, the Chief Product Cybersecurity Officer for Product Cybersecurity at the General Motors Company, and Brad Mederi, the Senior Vice President at Booz Allen Hamilton. Before break, Brad left us off with actually a really great point about operational intelligence and really what is it and how much there is. I'm going to start with Jeff on this one for this segment, talk a little bit about how you guys use operational intelligence, because the people on this side of the table, for those of you on radio, that's the FBI and DHS, maybe also give you guys some of that intelligence, and then you have to use it. So talk a little bit about how you guys are using that operational intelligence.
Yeah, so operational intelligence, good operational intelligence is critical, I think, to any organization. And I would say there's cyber threat awareness. So, we use operational intelligence to inform not only our decisions about maybe how we're defending our environment, but really it's used exclusively or extensively in the monitoring and detection phase of our capability. So when we get operational intelligence, we get a lot of data out of our environment. I think there's a very big difference between data and operational intelligence. We get a lot of data out of our environment that may help us detect if something is in our environment. But the operational intelligence allows us to really tune and focus on certain aspects of that data or certain aspects of the environment based on what we learn from the operational intelligence. So really it informs what we do from a detection and monitoring phase. And then it also gives us overall situational awareness, right? What's changing in the environment? Is there focus on certain aspects of maybe automotive ecosystem, maybe one of our brands, maybe one of our features in our vehicles? So I think it's a very, very important part of it.
How quickly can you take some of that operational intelligence and make a change? Obviously, we're talking about a patch or a vulnerability in a system, that's one thing. But when you hear about, hey, this attack surface is starting to see a lot more action, how quickly can you turn?
So I think, when you're talking about the way that you look at data, it's eyes on glass, right? It's an operations center with people looking at data coming out of either back-end systems or maybe telecom partners that we have, or maybe even on-vehicle data that's coming out of the environment. So I think you can do it pretty quickly. It's a matter of how you look at those sensors or how you look at those data feeds, and there's a human aspect to it, but then there's also a machine aspect to it that can, you can turn up the sensitivity on as well.
Just to actually build on that, I think there's a couple of big trends in the industry that I think are going to make a big change here. I think from an enterprise perspective, you have to assume breach, and if you assume breach, the whole game is the speed to detect and respond. And if you take that approach, intelligence, when you enrich it, can provide indicators and new rules that you can deploy across these expensive tools that everyone's buying to better detect the adversary. And two things I think that are happening in the industry. One is around automation and orchestration. And I think that there's not enough qualified staff. You need to be able to react at machine speed. And I think emerging technologies around automation and orchestration I think are going to be big players in the next for the next 18 months. I think the other thing is around SDN. I think having a network that can rapidly adapt and respond based upon emerging operational intelligence, so that you can do segmentation and you can create black holes and other things. I think it's going to be a real key ingredient to how enterprises become much more dynamic and responsive to emerging threats.
I think your point about automation orchestration is huge. I've at DHS, for example, Mark Schwartz, who's the CIO at the Citizenship and Immigration Service, talked about doing software development, and it's built in automation. The security tests are built in. So I'm going to turn to John a little bit. Not that you need to talk about what Mark Schwartz is doing at CIS, but generally speaking, automation orchestration, that's a key piece of what DHS is doing with the rest of the federal network security efforts in terms of whether it's the CDM program or Einstein or some of those other pieces. Talk a little bit about how you see this going, kind of commenting on where Brad is pointing the trends.
So I think the key point is to understand that automation is a key part in anything that we use if we want to try to integrate some of the intelligence that we have into a system and do it at machine speed. So the automated indicator sharing program that we're putting in place now is a key element of that. It's a program where we share indicators as part of our overall information sharing portfolio. We share indicators with the .gov space. We share indicators with other partners in the commercial space, and it's speed of sharing. And as Brad was saying, that allows you to then tune your defenses to your risk profile and put yourself in a better defensive posture. On top of that, what we try to do is we try to provide context to some of those indicators through more analytic products that analysts can actually take a look and read, that has the context to where those indicators came from, how we got them, how they should be used, how you should be thinking about using those in your risk management process.
Jeff, I'm going to put you on the spot here, a little curveball here. Sure. Not to ask you to tell us too much about your work with the federal government, but when you get intelligence, whether it's from DHS, FBI, whomever, what's it look like? Give me a big, broad sense of what you can do with it. Because one of the things that John mentioned that I thought was interesting was the speed to kind of sharing the changing of defenses. Can you get that information and make a change? Can you give me a sense from a private sector perspective?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the sources of intelligence, there's probably a multiple sources of intelligence, so I'll hit the federal government one too. But we do even just a lot of open source intelligence. So what's available out there openly that we may learn. We have partners that help us with dark net intelligence. So actually looking at key indicators about our business, specifically about our business, our brands, our products, and what might be going on in that space. And then we also obviously have partners, get government feeds from our partners in the government, and those could be unclassified feeds, or they could even be classified feeds that come into certain people in our organization. So when we get that, obviously the way the information comes has to be handled in certain different ways, but that information then goes to our threat intelligence teams and the teams that do intrusion detection and things like that. Because I think Brad said it perfectly. It's not just about tuning your defenses, because I think defenses are really important, but it's how you can monitor, detect, and respond to an incident is really, really important in our space, because you have to assume breach if you're going to be capable of monitoring, detecting, and responding. So it allows us to then take all that and really tune all those aspects of our cybersecurity posture, I guess I'd say.
Interesting. Let me turn to Don Fries from the FBI, because you guys have a kind of a foot in both sides of the world, right? The commercial side and the public sector side. Talk a little bit about how when the FBI and operational intelligence.
Sure. So as we look at intelligence period, operational or otherwise, through the collection all the way through the production phase, the sole reason of it is to get ahead of the threat. And we really talk about moving ahead of the threat. Our watch floor, CyWatch, works closely with John's teams. Really, and to be specific, we work to really inform targeted identities when they're targeted rather than when they're impacted. So that is an enormous effort, and it's one we've improved in the federal government significantly. And that goes for both government entities and private side. So thousands of targeted identity notifications a year. And essentially what that is when we see an adversary reconning a system, preparing an attack, moving through those efforts, we're going to move ahead of that to make sure that the information is shared. We also want to do, and service what both Brad and Jeff mentioned, is add credibility to intelligence. So it's always an imperfect game. There is that human-machine interface is critical to proper intelligence sharing. So you have to have people that can act on credible intelligence. And if we all do that in a more synchronized effort, that's great. And we talked about quite a few different points about intelligence. There's always from the vendor side on automated intelligence up to the real lower speed, human reviewed, understand what your mission and your threat landscape looks like so that you can act on things. All are just as important depending on what the adversary is doing, from insider risk up to some of the commoditized risks that we've seen in the criminal actor sides of things. So it takes a team effort that's very important. The government's very interested in providing that early warning and indicators. We certainly support the AIS program, and our shop works to churn out those indicators, working closely with DHS.
There's been a concern over the years that cybersecurity has just been too reactive, right? So it's interesting to hear that you say get ahead of the threat. You're seeing kind of signs, and the signs point to, well, this organization, this sector, this whatever, seems to be preparing to be attacked, if you will. Can you give me a sense of what something may look like? Is it a specific set of actors? Is it a a pinging on a certain type of technology? I mean, I know there's a limit,
Sure.
but generally speaking.
Let me focus the question a little bit just to command and control reporting. So when we see malware that's beaconing out somewhere in the domestic space, somewhere in the United States, that can be a clear sign, an indicator of exfiltration that's about to occur. So that's a very simple, open source kind of understanding of an attack vector that's taking place. It may mean that there's a nation state involved. It may mean that a criminal asset has placed malware into a system. But when that beaconing is occurring, rather than admiring and studying the threat, which has gone on for a long time, rather than continuing to collect and waiting to see what would happen, much of our mission space has really changed to trending way ahead on action of those things. So understanding what we're seeing, interpreting that through all the things that we see both from open source through classified sources, extremely important to adding context around that and being able to act in a way that's responsible to help protect the United States. And that's the same posture we take with counterterrorism, counterintelligence, other missions in the FBI. We do that with all our joint partners. The agency that I work in and represents has over 24 federal agencies in it, and we work every day, people on scene and on site, to do just that. So it's really protecting Department of Defense all the way through the intelligence community and the federal law enforcement side, and ensuring that the private sector that interacts with each one of those has as much early warning indicators as possible. Now look, I'll also say this. It comes back to that very first point about leadership. Just because, and I believe John made the point about leadership and communication has to be effective, it has to be clear, it has to breed some type of action. The eyes on glasses, as Jeffrey talks about, they can only act if they're well led in their security operations center, if enough judgment and intuition is applied to what's going on in the problem. We talk about speed of cyber, but there's still human-machine interaction that has to occur. And that, I don't believe that's ever going to be automated away, because our adversary is always human as well. So as the threat increases and as everyone's posture increases, we have to do this more as a team sport, and that's why we don't just have the government talking at the table. It's very important that we work with industry as well.
Brad.
Yeah, just a couple, Don, great points. In terms of the human interaction, I think that where we're going is shifting machines to do some of the more routine tasks to free up the talent to actually focus more on the deep forensics. I think that's one. The other thing on the intelligence side, I'm starting to see a lot of our clients that continue to drown in data, and they're chasing indicators of compromise. Verizon did an interesting study 2 years ago in their breach report, and they examined 10 major, I think it was 10, major indicator of compromised feeds. And my hypothesis was there was going to be a significant amount of overlap. And in reality, there was only like less than 3%. And so what that says is the adversaries are continue to get more sophisticated. They continue to change their signatures, and every attack in some cases could be a unicorn. And so I think the other thing that the industry is going to be moving more towards is this whole notion of behavior-based analytics and being able to get a profile of your enterprise and start to identify anomalies outside of that. I think that we're in a very early stage there, but there's a lot of venture capital investment and a lot of product companies that are really putting some major investments in that area. And so I think that's another trend in the industry I think that we're going to see a lot more of.
John.
So I think Brad made a really good point about the using of automated information. One of the things that we're trying to do within the AIS construct is to assign a risk score that is based upon some of the more broad-based intelligence that we receive, so that when the automated indicator sharing program pushes a set of indicators out to you, it'll have a score with it, and then you can make a decision about how you use that based upon that risk score and line that up with the risk framework that you've developed for your particular organization. So I think that's important, and again, it's one of those things that we're trying to do to eliminate the data overload that Brad was talking about, so that the information that's being provided is more quality information, and then you have an idea about how to use it in your own structure.
Don.
Yeah, and to follow up on both points, Brad spoke very well on the what's coming in the field, and the analytics, the machine learning, even some of the AI research is being done, incredible. Algorithmics being applied, just incredible potential in those areas. But we have to be clear about something, and that is that we come into a point where products are designed, let's talk about next-gen firewalls, for example, that have IDS built right in there, intrusion detection systems built right in. Phenomenal products, can shrink attack surface incredibly, but they have to be strategically applied. And that strategic application takes us right back to a proper risk management framework and leadership that understands what's going on within an organization. Knowing the organization and where the risks lie. If that's not done properly, there's no amount of technology, automated or otherwise, that can help any of these things. Now, to be clear, I completely agree with Brad. The force multiplication we can add to the eyes on the glass is incredible if strategically applied. But if not, and if it's not understood by a team that leads it properly, many times we come into companies who have invested
Too much
millions of dollars
Uh-huh.
in very high-end IDSs and other systems that are either unplugged or might as well be because they've never been tuned properly, as John discusses. And so those are shocking, but they're not unpredictable because the adversary changes by the hour, and that's the threat analytics and the open source that we can all see. That constant tuning, awareness, and understanding of what's going on is critical.
All right, we're going to go to a quick break, so hold that thought, Brad. But I just want to say, if you notice one thing about what Don's been saying each time, it always goes back to a simple word, and that's leadership.
It is.
So
It
I think
really
we'll
comes out.
probably touch upon that workforce issue when we come back from break. You're listening to the panel discussion, Emerging Cyber Threats in Government, sponsored by Booz Allen Hamilton on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM.